Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different for reviews on my channel. A while back I had actually discussed the idea of using scores for reviewing products on some of my videos. A few years ago I made a video discussing why I didn't use scores. I feel that they sort of lost a lot of credibility, especially when it comes to things within the gaming sphere. Mostly due to the way that like a lot of video game reviews, for example, have sort of corrupted the score system. But I thought it'd be fun to try this anyway and to come up with what I hope to be a much more transparent way of actually being able to do these reviews and to give something an overall score. I always look back to some of the old like video game review shows that I used to watch in my youth, and here in Canada one of the big ones was called Electric Playground. And when they would do their reviews on the Run segment before it became its own separate show, they would actually score different aspects of the game out of like 5 or out of 10, and they would average everything together to get the final score. And I thought it was it was a much more comprehensive way, I think, of coming up with the scores, and it gives you a chance to sort of explain all these different aspects and sort of rate them and then have the overall. And I just thought it'd be fun to try. So I figured that the easiest thing to do this with would probably be with some of the starter sets that I have in my set. So I've actually gone through and created a list of starter sets that I have, and I'm going to, over the next few weeks, months, however long, we'll just be doing videos where I am scoring these and doing like reviews that have a numerical score attached to them. So I wanted to just take a moment at the start of this video to break down exactly how that's going to work before I get into the proper review itself. So the first thing is that my scores are going to be out of 10, because I figure that that is just a good round way of working with it. It gives you a bit of a broader score base to work with, and something like, you know, a 7 or an 8 out of 10 I think conveys the message a little bit better than, say, 3 out of 5 kind of idea. So all of my scores will be out of 10, and I've got several different categories here that I will be using to determine the overall score. So the overall, or the categories that I have, the first one is presentation, and presentation is, part of it is the quality of the materials, just the way that they kind of look, just the visual appeal to them, as well as durability and things like that. So for example, items that are printed in black and white will score lower than things that actually have full color artwork in it, because the stuff with full color artwork tends to be better presentation. So stuff like that, as well as box quality and maybe the quality, physical quality of the items included within. After that is character options. So things to consider here are pre-made characters versus ones you can make yourself. Are there the options to do both? Is it one or the other? How diverse is the character selection? What are the possibilities? So, you know, the overall player experience, I guess, in terms of what they have to choose from, is the second category. The third category is rules clarity, or the transition to full rules, and how smooth and easy that is going to be. How well does this starter set prepare you for the full game, and how easy is it to understand the rules, because these are designed primarily towards people that are beginning. It's meant to be an introductory product for those that are new to this particular edition or this particular role-playing game. So it's important that it's easy to follow. So that's something that I'll be looking at. Then I have adventure quality, because that's obviously going to be important. How well is the adventure designed? How well are the adventure elements presented, and, you know, things along those lines. This would also be for things that have you designing your own adventures. You know, how easy is that going to be for you as well? So that's going to be included there. And then we have value for MSRP, or manufacturer suggested retail price. So for example, if something is the presentation is somewhat affected by the fact that everything's more cheaply produced, but if the price is right for that cheaper quality, then that's something to take in mind. So something may be black and white, it may be poor quality, but at the same time it's also a significantly cheaper product than a lot of the other ones, and that would offset some of that as well. And then basically what I will do is score each of those out of 10 using whole numbers only. I don't want to get into like decimal points or 0.5s or stuff like that when it comes to this portion of it, at least for the purposes of this first video. And then I will add up all 5 of these categories, or sorry, 6 of these categories. There's no, 5 or 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, all 5 of these categories, and then average them together to determine the overall score. So, with that said, we're going to dive right into the 3rd edition D&D adventure game. The Dungeons & Dragons adventure game was released for 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons all the way back in the year 2000. Hard to believe, but it's 20 years ago that this product first hit store shelves. And so today we're going to be taking a look at this and giving the full review of it and coming up with like a score out of 10 for it. The first thing that I want to look at is the presentation overall. So the presentation also includes the physical quality, the construction quality, durability, as well as the way that the quality of the products inside and from a physical standpoint. So first of all, the first thing I will have to say is that the box for this particular set is kind of flimsy. As you can see, it's pretty prone to damaging and get damaged pretty easily. Now, when I picked this up, actually, I got it from a local bookstore at the time, and they were selling this for 50% off. They had 2 copies of it in the store, and the damage that you see here to this product right now is pretty much the exact same way that it looked back then. So it was just these, I've never seen in person any of these sets come into any store where there wasn't some damage on them. Now, I've had a little bit of shelf wear over the years, so these corners are a little bit more worn down than perhaps they were originally, but there was actually damage to the corners as well. And we also have, like I said, a little bit of shelf wear there, but the overall, the quality of the quality of the material used to construct the box, the cardstock itself, is a little bit on the thin side. As you can see here, we just got the back, but that said, the overall look of it is actually really nice, and I really like the artwork on the front and on the back, with like the back sort of being this entrance into a dungeon environment, and the front being these characters bursting through a door, which was sort of a nice segue or transition from 2nd edition over to 3rd edition, because the later versions of the 3rd or 2nd edition Player's Handbooks and Dungeon Master's Guide both had individuals like player characters in the Player's Handbook or monsters in the case of the DMG bursting through this door, and you have your iconic characters and this red dragon in the background. So overall, the look of it is really cool, but just the physical quality of the product is a little bit lacking when it comes to the box that it's made out of. Looking inside, the dice were okay. Now, these aren't the original dice. I had given those away since they were the same, but these were the colors that you would have had back then. So that's authentic to the way that the dice would have looked back then, and it'll be the same thing for another set later on, but these are the way that the dice would have looked. The size of the dice and everything. And yeah, they weren't bad. They were kind of, they were multicolored, which is great for beginners because you can tell them, you can name the die, but then just say which color it is to help them understand which one to pick up quickly to the point where they finally become a bit more trained in it. So that's fine. They are a flat color, but honestly, that's something that I wouldn't hold against them in terms of presentation. And then included inside, we have our rule book, as well as our adventure book. We have some ready-made characters, and we have a dungeon map with some thin cardstock tokens that you can use for the creatures in the dungeon, as well as things like symbols you can use for dungeon dressing. There's treasure chests, there's other types of tiles in here as well. The map has the full dungeon map on one side and a blank grid on the other, which is great. The rule books and the adventure book are both fully in black and white with sort of a cheaper feeling paper. Like even the cover for both of these are made out of the same paper quality of paper stock as the rest of the booklets. And like I said, it is sort of all in black and white. The one thing I will say that they've done a decent job of, though, is making sure that even though this is black and white, the shaded in text for room descriptions never gets too dark to the point where it's difficult to read. Later products would actually have that issue, so they did at least make things nice and light for the grayscale. But unfortunately, I would have liked to have seen a little bit of color, even if it was just the covers themselves, and then everything else inside being black and white wouldn't have been too much of an issue. But overall, from a presentation viewpoint, I give this overall a total of 6 out of 10. There's some great stuff in here, but the box quality is not very good. It is flimsy, it is prone to damage, and like I said, all the ones that I've seen have had some sort of damage on them, and everything is sort of in black and white. And the tokens that you use, which is a great inclusion, I'm not going to say that they're not, but they are also, quite thin and can, just feel a little bit cheaper than some things that have been done in years following this one. So quality or presentation gets a 6 out of 10. Alright, so now let's take a look at the character options available to you in this starter set. Now the characters are all pre-made here for you. The set does actually include a blank character sheet that you can use, but there's no actual really comprehensive rules for creating characters at all inside the rulebook. There's a little bit of information on what happens when you go from level 1 to level 2, but it doesn't really go over the ability scores, it doesn't go over the racial traits or anything like that, so you really are stuck with using just the ready-made characters. The positive thing about it is that there's actually quite a few characters to play. This does follow sort of the basic character or the traditional character race class combinations that we've seen throughout D&D's history. So we're looking at clerics, fighters, rogues, and wizards. And then for races, we have dwarves, elves, halflings, and humans, but we do have a little bit of a mix of characters here. So each class has 2 different characters that you can play. So for example, if you want to play a cleric, you have a choice between Jozan and a choice between Eberk, the dwarf cleric, so you have some options there. For fighters, you can look at either Regdar or Tordek, so you have again a human fighter, a dwarf fighter, human cleric, dwarf cleric. Then when it comes to the thieves, we have a human thief of Kerwin, as well as the iconic halfling rogue Lida. And then for the wizards, we have the elven wizard of Miley and a human wizard of Null. So you actually do get a pretty decent selection here in terms of, you have some options. Sure, it would have been nice to have had other races from the player's handbook included in this as well, or maybe some other class options, like if you're going to include 8 characters, maybe branch out into some of the other classes like druid or barbarian, ranger, sorcerer, things like that. But overall, you still get a pretty decent assortment. And for a starter set with pre-constructed characters, this is actually a pretty high level of choice that you have in terms of like the number of options available to you. So that's something that I do have to take into consideration. It would have been nice if there were ways to make your own character, especially given that they provide you with a blank sheet and everything to use, but at the same time, you still get a decent amount of choices available. So from that perspective, I do still have to give this a 7 out of 10. Alright, so up next we are looking at rules clarity, or the ease of transitioning from the starter set to the finalized rules. So as far as the rules clarity goes, I have to say that this is a little bit lacking in terms of really good descriptions of like the classes, the races, ability scores, things like that. Like, it's just, unfortunately, it's a little bit lacking. It doesn't give you the chart for ability scores and modifiers. It doesn't give you the chart for like first and second level characters. It doesn't give you the actual modifiers that these races will provide you for for choosing them, for like what attributes get modified or what some of their abilities are. It gives you a little bit of information, but not, honestly, really not a ton. As far as transitioning from the rule set here to the finalized rules, honestly, I don't think that's going to be a huge deal. But the characters themselves aren't necessarily great, and they are really limited in what you have to choose for their second level abilities. So you really are sort of better off just remaking the characters if you wanted to continue playing them, using the full array of abilities included in the player's handbook. But other than that, I mean, it describes the base core mechanics of the game well enough so that you should have an idea of how to run the game or how to play the game. It also does give you a nice little example of play, which is always great to read, and some other decent information. The biggest thing, like I said, would have to be just the fact that it doesn't really do a great job of really defining the races or the classes or the ability scores. Like, it talks about abilities, but the only way you know from this starter set what your attribute modifiers would be is just by looking off the sheet, and those are the only things that you have to go off of. So including the chart would have been nice, and having more detailed information about the races and classes included also would have gone a long way to being able to let you make a character. I think would have gone a long way, and it is easy to transition from this to the full 3rd edition rule set, but like I said, I think you're better off just simply remaking your characters. Like, I don't see me wanting to take Niall here as is from this set and continue her journey with the from 3rd level and beyond. I would honestly rather remake her and have more options or more things to sort of choose from. So from that perspective, I do have to give the rules clarity, or as well as the transition from the starter set to the final rules, I'd have to give that once again a 6 out of 10. Alright, so now we are looking at the adventure quality. So the quality of the actual adventure included in the starter sets, because the adventures are a major component of these beginner sets, and it's always important to make sure that you have a pretty decent or pretty solid adventure to work with. So how is the adventure in the D&D 3rd edition adventure game? Well, it's actually a series of smaller adventures that all sort of escalate and become a bit more complex. The dungeons become a bit larger as you go, and it actually gives you, I think, 6 scenarios in total. The first one's just a simple 2-room dungeon where you're trying to rescue a unicorn from a group of goblins that had captured it. And then like I said, it just kind of goes up from there. So there's a dwarven mine that you go through for the next adventure, which has, I think, 4 rooms in it, 4 or 5 rooms, as well as some traps and other elements added to it. And it becomes, like I said, just more complex as you go. The third one is only 3 rooms, but it's where you start getting into creatures with multiple attacks as you're going through this crypt to try to get a piece of a burial shroud, and there's this necromancer who's necromancer in name only, not really so much in his selection of spells, but this is where you start fighting skeletons and possibly snakes as well. And then we move on to the magic statue. You find a map in one of the earlier adventures, I believe, that leads you here. And the magic statue actually gives you some magical buffs that last essentially for the rest of the particular scenario that you're going through, which is kind of cool. Then we have the captured caravan, which again comes up with more complex creatures. We got a gelatinous cube, orcs. We have like some other things included there. And then we get to the final scenario, which is the Hall of the Dwarven Lord, which literally uses the entire dungeon map included inside. And this thing has like 26 rooms, I think, in total. So this last adventure is a pretty big one to go through overall. And by the time you complete this, your character should go from second and reach all the way to third level, and that's when you move on to the player's handbook. So there's a lot of variety in here, and I think that the difficulty curve, as I'm trying to get the words here, but I think that the difficulty curve works rather decently here. I don't think any of the adventures are necessarily too far out of the player's abilities. Some of them are going to be more challenging than others, and so when we have dungeons a little bit later on that are smaller than ones before it, it's because there are more difficult creatures to overcome, so the encounters themselves become a bit more deadly. So all of that is actually really great, and having 6 different scenarios does provide quite a bit of variety in terms of the different things that you're doing. The one issue that I would have to say that I take with this adventure book is that the focus of all 6 scenarios is exclusively on the dungeon crawling aspect of it. There's really no opportunities to really role play. There's a couple of small potential situations where you could do that throughout the course of some of the adventures. Like there's this rogue that you can encounter in the magic statue adventure that you can either befriend and work with, or you could become a nemesis. So you have a little bit of interaction there, but there's not a lot to it. Every scenario starts with the characters entering the first room of the dungeon, and all the role-playing stuff that you could have done is just taken care of in the flavor text. Like, you're hired by this person, this is how much they're willing to pay you, and you are now standing outside of the dungeon. So there's a lot of variety in terms of what you're doing. It's not just this one all-engrossing adventure that's going to sort of wear on people over the course of the entire adventure booklet. You get quite a few nice things to do. The problem is that it is hyper focused on the dungeon crawling aspects of it, which is a major part of the Dungeons and Dragons game, and I certainly understand that. But it comes at the expense of role playing, and I think something that these starter sets really should try to focus on, or at least provide some opportunity for, is the opportunity for the players to become comfortable with role-playing their characters and being able to speak in character and do things like, interact with the person giving them a quest and maybe negotiate a fee. Things along those lines I think would be a little bit better to do. So overall, there's some great stuff in here, but it is a little bit, again, hyper-focused on the one aspect to the detriment of the other, so I have to give adventure quality. It does knock a little bit of the score down, so I give it a 7 out of 10. Still a lot of different things that you can do, so it's great from that perspective, but it does force the Dungeon Master to do a little bit more work if they want to have more social interaction. Alright, so finally, the last category that we're going to look at here is value for MSRP, and that's where this sort of gains a little bit of bonus, or a little bit of a boost in terms of the overall score. So while the presentation does feel a little bit lacking due to the thin quality of the box that is included in the black and white booklets, the thinner cardstock tokens, all of that is something that does feel a little bit cheaper, but it's justified in the retail price of this product when it first came out. This was a starter set that only cost $9.95 US or $14.95 Canadian. So for me, the full retail price that I would have paid was $15. So the question is this worth $15? And it's actually, the answer is yeah, it is definitely worth $15. There's a lot of great stuff in here that you get a lot of use from this set, beyond just what's included here. This map in particular is something that I use so much that if I try to unfold it now, it's just going to start falling apart. So this map was something that I had used for several years before finally retiring it and putting it back in the adventure game box where it just sits with everything else. You've got a variety of characters. You have 2 different character options for each of the 4 classes included, which is great. The dice themselves are, always great. They're an important addition, and even though the card tokens are a little flimsy, a little thin, the fact of the matter is that they're still a welcome inclusion that that Wizards of the Coast didn't necessarily have to do. They could have just simply prompted you to use whatever you wanted to represent your characters, or steering you towards a line of, at the time I think they would have been pewter minis. So the quality or the value for the MSRP is actually pretty high, and I think it does offset everything that I said about the presentation aspect of it. Now, at the same time, is it the absolute best thing you could possibly get for your money, or is it like a perfect example of value? I honestly can't say that either. I think there's a lot of good here, but there's also a lot of missed opportunity in terms of giving you more options for your players to be able to make their own characters and really be able to make those characters relevant and worth converting or just carrying over to the finalized rule set. But that said, the value for what's included in this box for the price that it was at the time, I have to give it an 8 out of 10. It's top notch. If I were using half scores for this section of the video, it would probably be an 8.5, but I'm not, and I don't quite feel it's good enough to rate a 9, so I'm going to give value for MSRP a total of 8 out of 10. So overall, the Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition adventure game is pretty decent overall. Like, I think that there's some things that they did really well, but at the same time, I think it's offset or at least counterbalanced by some of the things that they could have done a much better job of. So for example, the presentation is a little bit lacking in terms of the quality. Like I said, every box that I've ever seen has had some sort of crushing or damage to them. And when I picked this up, this was the better version of the 2 that I had seen in store, and they were like brand new and wrapped in cellophane. But they were still both, pretty damaged. The other one was actually like full-on ripped, and it's just from something being placed on top of it in the shipping box, basically, is what I was told by the people at the store at the time. So that was a little bit disappointing. The character options, it's great to have a selection of characters, but it would have been nice to have taken advantage of that blank character sheet by providing some really decent rules for making your own character. And to that effect, they could have taken the monster section of the rule booklet, put that with the adventure booklet, where I think it probably should have been in the first place, and dedicated a few extra pages to that, which is a little bit of a shame. And the characters are also just so-so and okay. But I think that anything that you would make yourself would honestly make for a better character to play going into the actual hardcover rule set. The adventures are pretty good in terms of the fact that there are 6 different scenarios for you to go through, each using different portions of the map included. The downside to that, as I stated, was just the lack overall of good role-playing scenarios or situations where you can actually just interact with the people giving you these tasks and being able to negotiate fees, or just interact in general and focus on the role-playing side of the role-playing game instead of just the dungeon crawling side of it. But there's also a lot of great stuff in terms of the fact that this was a much cheaper starter set than a lot of other ones out there, that came out after it. So the value was good, but I don't know if it necessarily completely made up for the lower quality of some of the products included inside. So taking everything into account, taking all of the scores from presentation, character options, rules clarity, adventure quality, and value for price, the overall score that I get for this is a 6.8 out of 10. Now, I know 6.8 sounds like a low score because we're used to things like, especially if you're into video games, we're used to, everything that comes out being like, anything that's less than 8 out of 10 is considered to be bad, but that's not what the score really represents. This is a scale out of 10, so anything that's, if it's up to a 5, for example, like a 5 out of 10 is an average experience. So something that it's not a waste of your time, it's probably not the best use of your time, it's not the most value for your dollar, but it's not like a ripoff. This is higher than that. This is almost 2 whole points higher than that. This is a decent amount of fun for what it is. It's kind of ultimately a bit of a shallow experience, but it's still an experience that I think is worth having. And being 6 out of 10 makes it a pretty decently above average experience. So there's a lot of good to this. There's upside to it. So 6.8 out of 10 is by no means a bad score. Like you probably, if you were to run this, for example, you may not really remember too much of it a decade later. You may almost completely forget everything about what was included. I know that's sort of the experience that I had when I opened this up for the first time in a few years. But there's still a lot of fun to be had here, and I think it would make for a couple of good gaming sessions overall. So there's that going for it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Like I said, this is sort of an experimental thing that I want to work with. I don't really plan on incorporating scores into everything that I do, mainly because I don't think it'll work for certain things. One of the things that I want to have with these scored reviews is just a wide variety of categories to work with. So you can get a better picture overall and see how you feel about, or how your feelings about individual aspects sort of affect the overall. So when it comes to the actual rule books or the adventures, like the hardcover adventures or adventure paths, I don't necessarily see me doing this kind of review for it, but for things like accessories or other box sets, for example, it seems like it might be a lot of fun to work with. So like I said, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you come back for the next video in the series when I will be taking a look at the D&D 3.5 basic game. The other starter sets that I plan on doing in this line, or in this series of videos, are going to be the 4th edition Essential Starter Set, the 5th edition Starter Set, the 5th edition Essentials Kit. I will not be doing the Rick and Morty versus Dungeons & Dragons or the Stranger Things starter sets for the purposes of this series, just because they're licensed products and most of their appeal, or a large portion of their appeal, is based on the licenses. I want to focus on things that are meant to actually teach you the game and act as sort of the introduction to that. So we'll be looking at 5th edition Essentials Kit, the Pathfinder 1st edition Beginner Box, the Starfinder Beginner Box, the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition Starter Set, as well as the Star Trek Adventure Starter Set. So I'm looking forward to doing all those. And like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed this series, and let me know if you would want to see me incorporate the 0.5s into the different categories. Right now I just wanted to use whole numbers to make it a little bit easier, but if you'd like to see like the 0.5s be included, like a 6.5, 7.5, 5.5, whatever, let me know that, and that's something that I might be able to incorporate into the next video. So thanks again, I really appreciate all your support, and I'll see you next time. Take care.